The Knights Templar didn't invent banking to protect pilgrims or serve God. They built Europe's first international financial network to solve a violent cash flow crisis that threatened kings and crusades alike. And once you see the real mechanism, you'll recognize the blueprint behind modern global finance. In 1307, armored knights who had once guarded Jerusalem were suddenly arrested across France at dawn. King Philip IV ordered hundreds seized, their property confiscated, their leaders tortured. Officially, they were heretics. Unofficially, they were something far more dangerous. The puzzle is this: how did a monastic military order become so financially powerful that a king feared them more than an invading army? Before the Templars, wealth moved slowly and dangerously. Gold traveled in chests guarded by swords. A pilgrimage from Paris to Jerusalem meant carrying coins across 2,500 miles of bandit territory. Kings financed wars by squeezing taxes from peasants or begging Italian bankers for loans at crushing interest. Power belonged to whoever physically controlled treasure. Then, in less than a century, that changed. Here's what most people don't understand. The Templars weren't trying to be holy bankers. They were solving a logistics nightmare created by the Crusades themselves. By the end of this story, you'll see medieval banking not as religious charity, but as strategic infrastructure for war and political control. The real story starts in 1119, in a city still smelling of smoke and blood, Jerusalem. Newly captured by Western knights who suddenly realized they had conquered something they couldn't afford to keep, in 1119, Jerusalem sat at the edge of a fragile Latin kingdom, carved out after the First Crusade. Fewer than 200 knights controlled a territory surrounded by hostile powers. Baldwin II, king of Jerusalem, ruled perhaps 120,000 subjects across a thin strip of land stretching from Jaffa to the Jordan River. His treasury was nearly empty. Lindy. Pilgrims kept arriving from Europe, but most were robbed or killed on the road from the coast to the Holy City. Enter Hugues de Payens, a minor French nobleman who proposed a simple solution: a permanent military order dedicated to protecting pilgrims. 9 knights took vows of poverty and obedience. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. They were given quarters on the Temple Mount, hence the name Templar. For a few years, this worked. They escorted caravans, fought skirmishes, and survived on donations. But the problem wasn't bandits, it was scale. By the 1120s, thousands of pilgrims a year were crossing from Europe. Each carried coined silver deniers, English sterlings, Byzantine hyperpyra. Every sack of silver was a magnet for violence. Back in Europe, nobles donated land to support the Crusader states. By 1139, Pope Innocent II issued the papal bull Omni Datum Optimum, granting the Templars exemption from local taxes and placing them directly under papal authority. That single decree meant bishops couldn't interfere, kings couldn't easily tax them. They answered only to Rome. What happened next changed everything. Because suddenly this small military order controlled farms in England, vineyards in France, ports in Italy, and fortresses in the Levant. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were sitting on a scattered empire of assets and facing a new problem. How do you move wealth across continents without losing it to thieves or politics? First, the standardization trick. Before the Templars, a pilgrim leaving Paris might carry 100 silver livres stitched into his cloak. If he survived the journey, he arrived with whatever hadn't been stolen. The Templars did something radical around the 1140s. They let pilgrims deposit money in Europe and receive a coded letter of credit redeemable in Jerusalem. This wasn't symbolic. A pilgrim could walk into the Templar preceptory in Paris, deposit 50 livres, and receive a parchment listing the amount in cipher, presented in acre, and the Templars paid out the equivalent in local currency. No gold crossing bandit territory. No heavy chests. Within decades, thousands used the system. Second, the military advantage. Here's what most historians miss. This wasn't about charity, it was about liquidity for war. When Louis VII of France launched the Second Crusade in 1147, he didn't haul every coin across Anatolia. He relied on Templar houses to supply funds en route. That meant armies could move faster, pay mercenaries locally, and avoid transporting tons of metal. But here's where it gets interesting. Muslim traders and Christian merchants alike began trusting Templar notes because they were backed by real assets in multiple kingdoms. The network itself became the guarantee. The order's seal meant payment would be honored in London, Paris, or Acre. Third, the network effect. Once dozens of European nobles used Templar transfers, others had to join. Taxes, ransoms, and crusade funds increasingly flowed through Templar houses. By 1200, you could deposit funds in England and withdraw in the Levant with remarkable reliability. The system became self-reinforcing. If you weren't inside it, you were financially isolated. But that's not the full story. What looked like financial innovation had casualties. Jewish moneylenders in England and Lombard bankers in France had long financed kings at interest. The Templars, technically bound by vows against usury, structured transactions as fees and currency exchanges. They operated in a gray zone. In London, the Temple Church became a financial hub. Kings stored treasure there because it was considered sacred ground that bypassed traditional financiers. By the 1250s, significant royal revenues in England were passing through Templar hands. The real genius was control through custody. Before the Templars, wealth was personal and visible: coins in chests, silver on tables. After the Templars, wealth could exist as records in multiple houses. During the Eighth Crusade, French royal funds were coordinated through Templar accounts across Europe. The cost of moving specie dropped dramatically. Italian banking families in Florence and Siena competed aggressively. In some regions, merchants preferred local credit networks. For a time, multiple systems coexisted. But here's what sealed the Templars' dominance: political neutrality backed by papal authority. They were exempt from local courts. If a lord defaulted, the Templars could appeal directly to Rome. Once kings began using them to store and transfer tax revenues, opting out became risky. Refuse their system, and you risked exclusion from royal contracts or crusade privileges. The choice wasn't framed as coercion, it was framed as convenience. Convenience backed by papal immunity as power. Then, in 1307, everything changed. King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted after wars with England and Flanders, faced a financial crisis. He owed substantial sums to the Templars, who also managed parts of the French treasury. On Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip ordered the arrest of Templars across France. Their assets were seized. Leaders like Grand Master Jacques de Maule were imprisoned. Official charges included heresy and blasphemy. But the immediate effect was financial. The king suddenly controlled Templar wealth within his realm. Within months, Europe watched nervously. Other monarchs hesitated, but pressure from Philip and Pope Clement V led to investigations. In 1312, the order was officially dissolved at the Council of Vienne. Their properties were transferred in theory to the Knights Hospitaller. The system didn't vanish, but it fractured. Royal authorities absorbed local assets. Italian banking families expanded into the vacuum. By the early 14th century, Florentine houses like the Bardi and Peruzzi were financing kings directly. What emerged was different. The Templars had operated as a supranational network loyal to the papacy. After 1312, finance tilted toward national monarchies and private banking dynasties. The coins still moved. The letters of credit still circulated. But the balance of power shifted from a religious military order to secular states and merchant bankers by 1320. France had effectively nationalized much of the Templar presence within its borders. Royal control over financial flows increased. In England, former Templar lands were repurposed, but the idea of centralized financial custody persisted. Over the next century, Italian banking houses refined double-entry bookkeeping and international credit systems. The template, pun intended, had been set. Dispersed assets, standardized records, cross-border transfer without moving bullion. The pattern repeated. When Spain financed imperial expansion in the 16th century, it relied on networks of bankers moving funds across Europe without shipping every coin. The mechanism, secure custody plus international credit, proved more durable than the order that pioneered it. The Templars fell. Infrastructure mindset survived. Sound familiar? Look at how you move money today. When you transfer funds online, no physical cash travels between cities. You rely on a network of trusted institutions updating ledgers. When modern governments justify financial regulations, They talk about security and stability, just as medieval popes spoke of protecting pilgrims. But the underlying mechanism is similar. Create a trusted network, centralize custody, standardize records, and make participation the default. Today, if you try paying your taxes in gold coins or private barter, the system doesn't allow it. You must use recognized financial channels. Over the past few decades, digital payments have grown from a minority of transactions to the majority in many countries. And just like in the 13th century, there's a power transfer. Traditional local intermediaries lose ground to larger institutions that control the infrastructure. The wealth doesn't disappear. It shifts toward whoever manages the network. Philip IV saw that clearly. Control the network, and you control liquidity. Control liquidity, and you control politics. Different technology, same logic. So next time you move money with a tap on a screen, remember the armored monks who turned letters into liquidity. The same forces that drove medieval kings to rely on Templar vaults drive modern states to guard financial infrastructure. History doesn't predict the future, but it reveals the mechanisms that powerful institutions keep using because they work. If this changed how you see banking and power, subscribe. Every week I uncover the hidden financial systems behind history's biggest turning points. The past isn't dead. It's operating quietly beneath your feet.